for the meeting. All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neurodiversity in the SCA Bardic Roundtable. My co-panelists here, and pardon my lack of garb, you either got an autocrat today who was showered, or you got an autocrat in garb, and I figured that the shower was much better for my mental health. My co-panelists today are Ruqayya bint Rabia Aliyah. I don't speak any Arabic, so you'll have to excuse me for that. Well, you don't have to, but you're going to have to anyway because I said so. And Drake Orenwood. And we are the Neurodiversity Roundtable panel.
Hi, everyone.
I'll make you feel better, Hilla, because I'm wearing my Hugh Jackman tour T-shirt right now. I am totally not in garb. So.
Me either. I'm in a.
I just went into the other room and threw on a chitin, so you know.
So this is me at the last minute trying to make an attempt at garb, then forgetting about it and being completely oblivious to the impact that it has on how other people see me and how they feel in this space.
Well, I figured this sweater actually gives a garb-like look to it. So I was just like, it works, you know.
Oh, if I were someone else outside myself, I'd be telling me that this compromise is a really, really terrible compromise that accomplishes none of my goals. And if I didn't think it was really appropriate for this particular panel, I would do something different.
So my thoughts on the panel is that we're going to have a basic first kind of discussion more on our thoughts on why are we having this in the first place? Where is the need? And also, I was hoping for more people. I'd really like to have people who are not neurodiverse. But we can spread this word on why it's important to know about neurodiversity, what the heck is neurodiversity, how it affects us in BARDs, and also how people who are not on the spectrum can actually accommodate those of us who are. So, first of all, Drake, did you want to do any presentation? You are the head of our of the Facebook page. Would you like to do, or would you like me to?
I'll speak if you want me to, or rather, I'd like to speak. And
please speak.
If I can do it without talking over other people, I will do my best, as that is one of my stumbling blocks that I'll talk about later. So I'm Drake Orenwood. I am from the East. I have been in the SCA on and off since, oh my gosh, it's 30 years this year. A lot of that off. I've been active in play steadily, and in particular in the Bardic community for about last 8.5 to going on 9 years. And I'm currently the Consort's Bardic champion for the East Kingdom. An achievement I feel really proud of and have been working very hard to mask how obsessively proud I am of it, because I know that boasting is one of those ways in which I clash terribly with SCA culture. I launched the SCA Bardic Arts group about 8.5 years ago. I stepped down as moderator of it a few months back to make sure that the SCA Neurodiversity group would get my full attention if it needed it, and I was concerned it might. I've been relieved so far that it hasn't really actually been as demanding as I had feared, because most everybody in it after the first day or so has been really positive and cooperative and polite, and there's been a little back and forth here and there on a few things. Quick backstory, and I'm asking you genuinely, When I ramble and lose track of how much time I'm taking up, please somebody put up a finger or something so that I can get back into the moment and stop myself. I was diagnosed, I'm 52 now. I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or back then was just called ADD. As it happens, 94, so about 3 years after I first joined the SCA when I wasn't active. So half a lifetime ago, a little over, and it changed everything for me. Completely changed the pattern of losing and constantly failing that had been my life's experience up to that point. Because without the crucial information I hadn't had about the way in which my neurodivergence affected how I interacted with other people and how I approached projects, plans, employment, friendships, it was doomed to failure. And I internalized from that a lot of frustration that I realized now was a neurotypical society, particularly one that didn't understand, because ADHD is comparatively so, why I couldn't fit in, why I wasn't trying hard enough, why I was so lazy, why I was so self-absorbed, why I was such a bad friend, why I was such a poor romantic prospect, why I was so unself-aware. Coming back to the SCA 9 years ago, I was diagnosed, I was married, as a father, and it's become clear to me over that time that while I have a better understanding than I did of myself, there's a lot of ways in which I judge many other people like me, can be a really rough fit with SCA culture as I've come to understand it. There's one particular, the elephant in the room, so to speak, is I have a story I tell myself that the SCA is a bunch of people who are very neurodiverse. And by neurodiverse, I mean there are neurotypical and neurodivergent people together in it. Desperately trying to mask as a very neurotypical organization, and imposing unwritten rules of conduct that are designed to demonstrate how well you can pass as neurotypical. Many of them get referred to under courtesy and peer-like qualities, or PLQs. For myself and for many other people I've met, it's come to feel very gatekeepy, because it has this tendency to be a reason that I judge, I hold myself back accidentally, unconsciously, and I'm never told in the moment, because the SCA's rules of courtesy are that you do not give direct feedback to people to their face. And as a result, a lot of pieces of particular rejection-sensitive dysphoria, something I've only learned about in the last couple of years, get triggered very regularly in these spaces. The idea that people are saying unkind things about me, judgmental things about me behind my back, and that I'm not finding out about it till later, and that then I don't get to know who said it. I don't get to hear the specifics of the context so that I can perhaps review what happened, recognize what was going on in that moment that I wasn't aware of, and the way in which I was impacting people different from my intention. And I can't course correct. That's why I started the group. And I cede the floor.
I would just like to make a comment on the very last thing that you said. Not that my husband isn't neurodivergent, because he is, but there's an intersection there of passive aggressive people that we also have a lot of in our group. And so we in particular had a past figurehead in our barony that was the queen of the someone said, and I'm not going to tell you who, that you said something on such and such an occasion that we now cannot remember and cannot go back. but would never, do that. I'm not going to tell you who. It's like, well, you know what? Bring your evidence, lady, because that's just you being passive aggressive. So there are a number of things working together to make that an unfortunate situation. So I would say that's the first response to it's not just that it was a neurodivergent situation. It's some people's passive aggression.
Annalita?
A thing that I was trying to write down in the chat, so I had the question, but I'll throw it in now.
Yeah.
Something that you said has made, I've had this thought before, and you and I maybe even have talked about it or touched on it in the past.
Me or Adelaide?
You and I, Drake and Annalita.
Yeah, I thought so.
I'm thinking for some people who are hoping or envisioning a path for their SCA experiences, this very feedback gatekeepery weird thing in terms of how dependency works and how laurels and pelicans and knights or whatever, they'll sort of like praise my person in person and give me criticism in private. And how that also can really so one, the thing that you fear is, I'm going to say it's real, right? It's, that's a real thing. People talk about all of us to other people, but when we are a dependent or we're in a relationship in the SCA, we've almost codified it so that it has to be that way, which I think is pretty crappy. And it's not an ideal to me as both a peer and a person. It's not the ideal way to do this. I had not thought of how harmful it would be I had not thought of how harmful it is in that additional way until you articulated it just this second.
Thank you. And let me say, I recognize, and it's really important, I want to say this, I recognize that the vast majority, 80 to 90 to maybe even 95% of the negative impacts that I'm describing are not intentional. They are not by conscious design. I think there is potentially a tremendous amount of internalized oppression that happens in, particularly in some of the neurodivergent or neuro-questionable folk who make it to the peer age, who make it to whatever polling order they strove for. And who then, intentionally, I don't think they consciously. I just watch the ways in which some of the people who've stumbled in the same areas that I have bumped into, in their attempts to try to offer me a warning, tried to point out the minefield, tried to theoretically make it less painful for me than they have found it themselves. The way we have it structured, it's really hard to do well. And having gotten far enough along now that I very much want to do the same thing for others, it really is hard. I have attempted occasionally when I spot somebody that I judge is likely to step on a lot of the landmines I've stepped on. My attempt to gently whisper in their ear, not in a way to say, I know such and so is saying something about you, but I anticipate that you seem like the sort of person who might end up bumping into some of the same walls I have. It's very hard to have that conversation well.
Yeah.
Particularly on a one-on-one basis, but it's the only way we are allowed to have it right now is on a one-on-one basis. And it's very difficult for it to not come across as condescending and insulting, which is the way I usually hear it, because really what goes through my head eventually when one of these things comes up is, I have been scanning the room ever since I walked in. And nobody has said anything. And I've been at this for a year and a half. And I'm getting tokens given to me at performances. And I've won a couple of competitions. And I had started to let my guard down. I thought I was safe. And I thought I was welcome, that I had found my tribe. And now I'm rethinking that. And of course, it was true. It's still true. This is my tribe. This subset in particular, the Bardic community, is completely my tribe. That's, my judgment. And we bump into each other a lot. And super easy to hold on to a negative thing somewhat, just like it is for me. And everybody that I inadvertently smack into, everybody that I inadvertently stick with a pin, talk across, because I'm terrified that I'm going to forget what I was thinking about, and I have poor impulse control, hold on to that for a long, long time. And it's very, very hard to undo those impressions once they've set.
And that's so there's a couple of things that you brought up there, and I apologize. I was also trying to. We have a teacher who's AWOL, another one. So trying to contact her and participate in this. There's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. One of them is definitely the gatekeeping. Part of the thing, especially with women who are neurodiverse, is that we have a harder time. We have a harder time of getting diagnosed.
Yes.
There is a thing. There is a thing in the neurodiverse community that basically we can, where there's what we call self-diagnosis, self-identification. The reason is because it is very difficult for an adult, first of all, to get a diagnosis, and second of all, for a woman to get diagnosis, because symptoms present differently. I say symptoms because that's what they use, but you might want to say characteristics. Symptoms makes it sound like a disease. Neurodiversity is not a disease. It is a different operating system, and the neurotypical community, as I've heard, the neurotypical community is like Windows. And the neurodiverse community is pretty much running different flavors of Linux. And it's funny because there are different variants. No person who is on the autism or ADD or other related neurodiverse spectrums has identical symptoms. So it is very much accepted among the community to be self-identified, self-diagnosed. There are online tests that are fairly accurate, but there's no way to get an official. It's kind of like service dogs in the United States. Most of them do not have an actual certification for service dogs, which is why we have kind of a problem right now with service dogs versus emotional support peacocks. That said, so it's the realization that we really needed to have this talk was threefold. Number one, my own journey for realizing that all this difficulty with coping with people and being able to, I love words. Words are my thing, but I started out, I'm going to be honest with you. One of the things is being very literal. I'm great with language, but I started out very literal. True fact, when I was 21, I thought oral sex meant that you talked about it. It took me until my high school years to understand that a serial killer, because I did not serial the homonym, didn't. So I thought for the longest time that it had to do something with Murder by Cheerios. There is a song somewhere in there. Learning that this was a thing that existed, learning that there's not just the typical rocking back and forth, which is something I actually did most of my childhood, different things. Anyway, that was a journey. Number two, so that was just a journey, and it's kind of, people don't see that, they don't know, and they judge you as though you are neurotypical. And Probably. I've probably done a few literalist songs myself. So there are.
Time you sang your taco song before I realized, and you introduced it the second time, pointing out you weren't talking about tacos. For me to realize you were talking about tacos.
I wrote a song about tacos, and it was about a completely different sort of taco. And if any of you are in the LGBTQ community, you know exactly what I mean.
Fred's
The
talking
song
about
was
that.
yes. So the second thing is that the way that I perceive the world has a basis in very physical word pictures. I don't think in pictures because I like terrible vision, but I think in word pictures, so that when I'm thinking of a concept, I don't think about love. I think about a box of puppies, This is something, when I think about hate, I think about a box of molten glass filled with daggers and lava. It's just what images come to my mind, but that actually informs how I do Bardic. The third is realizing that there have been, especially in these online Bardic circles, there are people who are neurodiverse. At events, there are people who are neurodiverse. I need sometimes to go to a room because all y'all just like people. It's difficult
for one moment.
Yes.
I'm going to run the risk, and I promise I want to be really mindful about A, mansplaining, and B, over word copying. To the extent that the neurodiversity movement is modeled on a lot of the civil rights movement, I personally take issue, and that doesn't mean I'm going to try to stop everyone, but since we're having this conversation, particularly for people who may be new to it, as I mentioned, and as I put on my label, I refer to myself as neurodivergent, as the opposite pole of neurotypical. I like it much better than neuroatypical or non-neurotypical, which are things that explicitly in the word define me as the sum of what I am not. Neurodivergent, to me, suggests there is a different path. There is a difference. There's a difference in the way I express that is outside that frame. And for me, I think to have the conversation meaningfully, I prefer not to use neurodiverse for that, just as I suspect that a person of color in a conversation about racial diversity would find it problematic to be referred to as a diverse person. One individual cannot be diverse to me versus a group. And I know that not everybody agrees.
I mean, for me, it's not a disagree so much as I don't really. Here's the thing: is that I understand. Right now, I'm doing this. This is kind of a 101 sort of deal. Mm-hmm. For some people who are not on who are. Yes, Adelaide.
Thank you. You're muted.
You're muted.
That's why, of course, having an autistic son, the spectrum is something, and I don't know. I don't have a young enough child to know if any of this is coming into the schools yet. But the idea of teaching people that everybody's on it somewhere, and yeah, neurotypical, neuroatypical, because we just got a new PCM care manager. He's a PT in the military, and the guy said, now people either love this guy or they hate him, and I thought, okay, that's a little scary. And my husband had said, can't stand the guy. And as soon as I got on the phone with him, it's like, he's on the spectrum. He's as exactly like when Hilla said, I'm so literal minded. And this guy was like, if it wasn't written in my record somewhere, he didn't think I had it. Okay. And I could tell him all I wanted. And so that was something, but understanding that
I'd actually
everybody's on it somewhere.
No, actually that's not true. And that's where I'd like to interject there. There is a range of neurotypical. And there are some things that neurotypical, and I mean, we're all human. We have things in common.
Right.
So that there are things that a neurotypical and a neurodivergent person can have in common. Now, real quick, getting back to your point, Drake, as a member of the community too, I am comfortable with either neurodiverse or neurodivergent. Neurodiverse is the older term. And so I use it when I'm, speaking to a larger group, just kind of, it's more familiar.
Right.
I definitely see your point with neurodivergent, and I like that. Adelaide, just to get back to you, and I didn't want to interrupt, I just want to make that strongly, is because there is this perception that, oh, well, you're just like us. Everyone's a little bit neurodivergent. Neurotypical people are also diverse. They have different ways of coping with things, different. Neurodivergent people, though, we have neurodiverse, but neurotypical people can usually just function, function in a neurotypical way. Also, neurotypical people have other issues, that aren't really covered by neurodivergent. For example, they may have phobias.
Mhm.
That's not, neurodivergence. That's a phobia. They may have a physiological thing that, makes them sensitive to X or Y.
Right.
So
And
there's
as a
a
white
huge,
cis male, I have various intersectional privileges.
like interrupting me.
Yep.
So I realized that sounded sharper than it intended to, Adelaide. It wasn't really at you. It was just kind of, I really want to make that point because it is a big misconception, that everyone's a little bit neurodivergent.
Can I
Yes.
then respond back to you? I mean, my house, I am the closest thing to neurotypical in my house. My husband and my son are both on the spectrum with a variety of, but their symptoms are completely different. They are, have different strengths and weaknesses. And so it's constantly trying to, who's grabbing the balls out of the air, trying to deal with the stuff. But I recognize it when I see it in other people, because, oh, there's one, and there's another one, and there's another one. And it really, I'm just talking about my house now, and
Yes.
the neurodivergent people in my house are very divergent. And even though they have probably the same genetic component of what all is going on with this, they're still really different, and
Oh, yes.
one of the reasons I wanted to get in here is that one of the things that breaks my heart is last night we were sitting there and the TV was off and my son was upstairs singing, and he has a beautiful voice, and he was singing Archie Fisher songs, and it was lovely. And I sat there and I was almost in tears listening to my son sing, because he will not come downstairs and sing with us. He will not sing in front of people, but he sings all the time.
Oh,
Rukaya has a point.
yes. Rukaya has her head up.
Yeah, I was just going to build on some of what Hilla was saying, and connect it back also to what we were saying earlier about diagnosis. So, Adelaide gave the example of someone being fairly rigid and literal in their mindset, but there's a lot of possible causes of that behavior. That person may be completely neurotypical and they have a personality that is very rigid, or they, the way that they've been trained to do their job is very rigid. And it's one of the reasons that diagnosis is really challenging. And honestly, there's a lot of, to get formally diagnosed is a very involved process. I'm not formally diagnosed. It's very expensive. There's a lot of you got to go to a lot of meetings with a therapist and go through a very, very complicated process, which is one of the reasons in the community we honor sort of self-diagnosis. But you can't really assume. And I think that that's something really important in dealing with the concept of neurotypical versus neurodivergent, and why we need to respect people's self-identification, because whether you're neurodivergent or not has more to do with long-term patterns that indicate sort of a difference in the hard wiring than necessarily, maybe a cultural response or the way you've been told to do your job, or, you know, something like that. There's a lot of reasons why someone might exhibit that behavior, and neurotypicals definitely exhibit sometimes behaviors we would consider more typically neurodiverse, but they do it for different reasons in different contexts, maybe not as, it's not as much a part of them, you know. He might not need to be, he might not be that way when he's not at work, but you don't really know that, you know. So that was just my thought with regards to that whole conversation.
Thank you. I see Luftwine has his hand up. We haven't heard from him before.
So I'm neurotypical, or at least haven't been diagnosed with anything, but I work as a special education paraprofessional in an ASD3 ASD room. So ASD Spectrum 3 means that they are not in the typical classroom for at least 2 of their classes. So these are higher impediment. And something that we're seeing with people that are trying to get special ed services is that people also will take, well, because this treatment for ASD helps, I must have ASD. Just because a weighted blanket calms you down does not mean you have ASD, especially in a special ed in a special ed situation where a more official diagnosis is a part of getting those funds. And that's it's total gatekeeping. I don't agree with it. I think every kid should have an IEP for the things that they need, but that's not the funds that we have.
Yes.
Yeah, if I may. So my son, Spencer, who some of you know, has ADHD and is diagnosed on the autism spectrum. We were ultimately very fortunate between my wife, Jessa's psychiatry background. She has a master's in psych. And my experience with a late neurodivergent diagnosis. Once we got past my denial, and he was only 2 at the time, we wasted no time, and he has really benefited from that, as he will tell you. He is a phenomenal young man. He's 16 now. At 10, when we started talking specifically about autism with him, he turned to me within the year and said, "Dad, I want to be an autism ambassador." And I just drank that in and I said, "Oh, you are." And he so is. And I remember when he was in a preschool program that was, as they call it, an inclusion program, where there are specifically diagnosed kids along with undiagnosed kids, presumably largely a neurotypical classroom. And but the diagnosed kids in question are intelligent enough, what we used to call high functioning enough, that they will benefit from a mainstream classroom. They will emulate and model the sorts of behaviors they see if they get enough treatment, if they get their needs addressed, and they will learn much more effectively than if they're in an environment where they don't get to see more neurotypical behavior. And a tricky line between encouraging them to mask and helping them build muscles that they're capable of building.
With of course the caveat that it's difficult again for the non-diagnosed because we're kind of thrown into classrooms and basically sink or swim, and it gets very interesting. Before we take it to how we specifically Bardic and that, but I mean, you know, also we're the panelists up here, me and myself and Rukaya and Drake, but obviously feel free to put in your own experiences or ask questions or whatever. You're muted, but you can unmute yourself. The only time I'm going to mute you as the host is if you have a lot of background noise going on and you forget to mute yourself while you're talking to someone off screen. Then I'm going to be a rude bitch and I'm going to mute you because that's just me.
Or if you were male, we'd call you assertive.
Oh no, I own the bitch label. You know, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes.
But yes, no, I'm not going to be. I understand the assertive thing, and it is so, and it's difficult also from a neurodivergent space because see, I'm learning, Drake.
I saw.
Um,
Thank you.
is that uh is that there's also a forthrightness that that I have because I find that although I can lie to save my own ass from time to time, I find lying extremely painfully difficult to do because it's just not part of my mind frame. So like, well, I can sit there and say to a customer, well, you know, what I was like, well, I don't really know, or yeah, this was on sale, wink, wink. But it's just like, you know, in general, very difficult to do. But one of the things is this concept of the spectrum. Now, this is an older, you know, there's the autism spectrum. That is a way that we've kind of, that specifically doctors and things have decided to kind of say, well, there's a spectrum. Why? Because there's a different gradient. But that's the thing, is that it makes people think that there is a gradient, and there isn't. There is not a gradient in the spectrum. What it is that there, in fact, someone, I wish I had it in my head. I wish I had it actually. There's someone who posted an interesting thing online, and that is, if you really think about it, there are certain level of categories, like maybe say 6, 7, 8 different categories of functionality, like language, touch, food, social interaction, staying still, this, that, vision, clumsiness. There are physical mobility, things like that, that are different different symptoms. There's different characteristics of the neurodivergent, and there are going to be some that they're really, really good at, that they are really strong in, and there are other things that it's like, no. Yes, I see 2 fingers. So,
I'll
Kaya, Drake. I see.
Go first.
You go first.
It's quick observation, which is I want to acknowledge the dirty little secret, which is neurodiversity, like all other scales of ability, and like all other areas where there is inequality and inequity, is a social construct. In other cultures, in other times, many behaviors, many manifestations, many forms of expression that would be considered perfectly valid or interpreted differently. I have 2 songs so far about the Fae. Well, I've one in particular about the Fae as I understand it, as an explanation people had for expression in a baby. You know, that was, there are other ways of seeing it, and in this place and time, in this culture that we operate in, the impacts of race, gender, ability, and all these other social constructs are very real.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to hold the contradiction that it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be this hard, and it is. And in the world we live in, with the people that we have in it, as Toki, one of my 2 teachers, now says to me, if we don't make space, if we don't find a way to include, we are making not only the people that we're excluding poorer, we're making the society poorer.
Yes.
Thank
you. Rukaya.
That is almost verbatim what I was going to say in terms of this idea of functionality, which is big air quotes around that, because I mean, a lot of, is all relative to the neurotypical standard.
Yes.
If the neurotypical standard didn't exist as such a rigid construct, so much of what we experience would not be challenging or problematic in any way whatsoever. You know, we would be able to fluidly fit in, much in the way as Drake mentioned, other cultures humans in historical, in the past when we lived in smaller societies, you would just have the dude that's really good at this one thing, so we let him do that and he serves the village by doing that, and it's not a problem.
Yes, exactly.
And indeed, we have the cultures where those children would never have grown up because they'd have been exposed on the mountainside.
Well, I was the third. I was born the third of a set of triplets, and so believe me, I know where I would have ended up. So, yes, exactly. When we're talking about the spectrum, when we're talking about different, like a cloud, when we're talking about different abilities, it is basically just to define us in terms that the neurotypical can understand. The funniest thing I got told once, and it was only once because normally normal is not a term that refers to me, but someone said once, "You seem so normal," and I'm like, first of all, I'm offended. But secondly, that it's a problem, especially for women, because and I'm bringing this up kind of as a segue, because I don't get to use the term segue enough, and it's such a freaking awesome term. And as a segue, it's difficult, especially for us women, because one of the things that we do, because of how we're wired as and I'm going to say, I'm not talking about biologic, I'm not talking about because trans and everything, but the way that a woman is defined. And when I say woman, I'm talking about people who are assigned female at birth, also people who are trans women. Women have their brains wired a little bit differently, and we tend to mask more. And when I say mask, it is basically that we look more normal than we are. Yes, Rukaya.
We are aggressively socially conditioned from a very young age to conform.
Yes.
Yes.
To defer.
Yeah.
Right? To defer, to not talk across, to not draw attention to yourself.
Yeah, I suck at that.
I'll throw one in, if I may, an observation that came to me a couple, 3 years into my journey when I started to recognize how difficult it was. I was finding it as a guy who grew up barely socialized male, in the sense that I got all the looseness of expectations overall, in that I wasn't being constantly corrected because men, AMABs typically are not, in my experience. And I still wasn't cutting it in terms of the expectations of behavior. That it came to me at one point when there was a podcast where someone pointed out it was a podcast for martial, for knights, and for people in heavy fighting, pointing out that in their experience, saying out loud proudly that you have specific aspirations, that you aspire to the peerage track you're on when you fight, is not, or so the host claimed, is not considered verboten. It's not considered a social faux pas. And it got me thinking, why is it that the martial activities presumably don't have that issue? And yet I don't spend a lot of energy, notwithstanding I was blessed with an award on it, but I don't consider myself primarily service path. But in the arts and sciences path, it is considered horrific. I half jokingly commented on a thread in Bardic Arts back my first year or so in, when people were asking about what draws you to it. And my comment, which was meant to be taken lightly, even if it was truth posing as a joke, was that I wanted to be a rock star. And I've heard from people that haunted me for years after, that left a mark on people. Hello.
Yes. So, a couple of things. One, to answer what you've said, and then one to go back to what I was segueing into, is that it is so, and I think it's difficult for us as bards in general, not just neurodivergent ones, that bards in general, we want our word fame. We have a certain amount of chutzpah. And so it's difficult to reconcile that with what is admittedly among most of the ANS community of, we must not say that we want to be peerage. Okay.
Because it's coded female.
here's the thing. Hi, my name is Hilla Stormbringer. I'm a willow. That is our grant of arms level award in the Midrealm. I want my laurel. I want a laurel really bad. I am salty I am not a laurel. I will admit it. That is my goal. Why? Because I can do so much with it. Heh, 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 heh.
Hey,
All
I
right.
want to be a laurel too. I don't, I wanted it.
Actually, and admittedly, I've also been said, wait, you're not a laurel?
Which
so,
I usually reply, I'm not even a grant yet. That's the part.
so I'll just say that right out there. Why? Because to me, my whole purpose as a bard, other than to be a bard, part of that is to foster newer bards, to grow the bardic community, to do a lot of things which I've been working my tushy off. By the way, hi, I'm Hilla Stormbringer. I am the Bard of the Midlands. I am a former bard of the border, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm also very comfortable with they, them. There, now you know all that's relevant to know. Second thing, I see in there, what are we doing?
Let's bring some of this in, because the people who watch later and aren't going to see the chat are going to miss a lot of great stuff that's going on the side.
Yes. So why am I introducing myself? In the part of it is because there is a lot of intersectionality. By the way, you may hear that, intersectionality. We don't have any people of color in this room, unless there are some that are not with their camera in here. But there is a lot of what we call intersectionality. And that is basically there are underserved, minority, disadvantaged communities. Women is one of them. Native Americans, Aboriginal peoples, indigenous peoples. I'm saying that because different words for different places in the world. Ethnic minorities, religious minorities, and then of course the LGBTQ community. So there's all these, and each one of these communities, we have our different difficulties. In much of the Western world, the normal is a white, Anglo-Saxon, but basically a white Western European, straight, neurotypical, Protestant Christian male. Cisgender, yes, sorry, cisgender. I'm like going, okay, I have to list all these things. And basically, so basically what you can do is let's put that at 0.0. And that you are taking for everything that you have that diverges from that, you get a negative. And that's in any community. So that's just that. But how does this relate to Bardic? Yeah. I'm going to real quick do a quick story, because it was why I said we need to do this as a roundtable. I've been running online Bardics since April of 2020. And I've noticed specifically because in live Bardic circles, it's a little bit easier because there is a more defined, you know how to act by watching everyone around you. Easy.
There's an assumption.
There is an assumption, but also a lot of times there will be someone who's going to help you, into it. A lot of those, excuse me, a lot of those safeguards are taken out when you're online. And I noticed that there were certain people that I was having in my circles that were again and again a problem with not knowing what to do, with interrupting, with having difficulties with changes and all that, and coming to realize that it was because this person or that person was neurodivergent. Being part of the community, I knew, okay, I've got these different things I can do as the host of the Bardic Circle to go ahead and help out. So, for example, and this is then I'm going to pass it to my two co-hosts and also open to questions, comments, etc. There are three things that I feel are just absolutely necessary for helping neurodivergent people in a Bardic circle. The first one is clear expectations. You want to have a format, and you want to pick that format and explain it. One of the most difficult formats, for example, for a neurodivergent person is going to be a popcorn. And that is because there is no knowledge of exactly what's going to happen. The social anxiety is really there. You have been kind of trained to not burst in, so that actually going, I want to go next is you've been trained out of that because it's a lot of times it's an impulse. So you want to have these expectations. How are we going to do this? What is the format we're using? Explain that and explain it over and over. The second thing, a popcorn format is going to be where, hi, we're having a Bardic circle, and just jump in
Right.
whenever you want to.
When you feel the mood, when you feel that you have a piece, maybe one that answers the piece that just went, pop up, do it. And I'll briefly mention, it's my favorite form because it works well with my relative disinhibition. For me, sitting and constantly planning what I'm going to respond as I wait for my turn to come around drives me bats, especially if the circle keeps growing while I'm waiting for my turn. And I also have always been very confident in my ability to hold the floor. So those are not the anxieties that come up for me. Keep going.
Right. I'm just saying in general, because it tends to be the least. There's going to be exceptions. These are trends. There is an exception to every rule because the neurodivergent community is extremely diverse. Especially for women, because we're also trained to be meeker. Really, the person who trained me, no, it didn't work, but it's difficult because it's difficult because it tends to be the least structured. That said, the less structure, the less structure, in this case, I'm going to say the less structure explained. If you are popcorning and you really know how it works and all that, especially if you got a wingman, got a wing buddy to kind of nudge you and go, you should go now, it's going to help you. But that's, so having those expectations. The second is knowing, either having somebody to be with you that's going to kind of be your conscience, or somebody who's running the circle to be willing to say, hey, is everything okay? So if you're running the circle, make sure that if a bard's been silent for a while, if someone's looking uncomfortable, you want to make sure that everyone in your circle is getting a chance. The third thing, and so also the third thing is gentle corrections, like, hey, can you stop interrupting? That's very important. Just to be able to step in there and go, hey, I understand, you might be having difficulty. Can you just please shush for a moment? And the last thing is, if you can, provide space for the person to step out, step away, or say, hey, maybe you should just step away from your computer for a while, whatever, if it's online. Or, just make sure, hey, if you need to get up, and even saying that, you don't have to single them out. Hey, if for some reason you're getting antsy, just step away from your computer, step away from the circle, go in the other room, whatever. Come back. Just make sure that there's space, because sometimes, you need it. And let people know it's okay to leave and come back, leave and come back, leave and come back. If you're making it a welcoming space, it's great. So I'm going to open that up to questions, comments, etc.
Yeah. I want to throw out quickly and then send it around just a few things that come to mind when I think about the impact of neurodivergence on performance and on Bardic in particular. Some of the things that come to mind are the experience of anxiety and how it affects you in that space. The need, the drive for validation that may come from years of getting negative messages that felt out of your control. I came into Bardic in my 40s, relatively settled. I felt I had been through so many of these struggles. I had found a way to be successful in my career. And I came in and said, hey, I've got this. I am so much better, so much more socially aware than the 24-year-old that was diagnosed. And I look around, but I so wanted, I drank it in, and I still feel it. And 9 years later, I'm at a place where the validation isn't this thing making my hand shake every time I'm in a circle. The flip side of it is I've absorbed the messages about the ways in which I stomp all over a space, the ways in which I inflate to fill a room and leave no one else room to breathe sometimes, to the extent that I came in with somebody who didn't have what I considered peer fear. And I do now. I don't fear any individual peer, but I always have in the back of my mind the idea that there are peers somewhere who are going to be discussing whatever I do, and no matter how hard I try, there's something I'm going to do that's going to upset one of them or offend several of them. And I'm going to find out about it somewhere between 2 weeks and a year from now, if I'm lucky. And whoever it is won't ever have a one-on-one conversation with me where I can demonstrate to them that this is the work of my life, that I am happy to take the feedback and I will do my very best to incorporate it. Most other areas in my life, once people discover that about me, it really shifts how they see me and it changes the dynamic. In the SCA, it's really, really hard for me to get that dynamic going. Next, Rukai, you had a...
Yeah, it so ties into, and I also have the experience of what you were saying earlier about people, the passive aggression, right? And people not giving you direct feedback, and how important, I think even for neurotypicals, that can be I think they can sometimes accept that that's just the dynamic a little better than neurodivergent people can. But I know for me, that creates so much anxiety of the fact of, if I do something embarrassing or weird or off kilter, nobody's going to come and tell me. I'm just going to make an ass of myself. And then I'll find out about it, like you say, 6 months, a year later, like, oh, we didn't invite you because you did this weird thing 6 months ago. And I never got a chance to explain that I was having a weird day, or I just didn't understand the social interaction that was going on at the time. I'm very good at oversharing. I'm very good at jumping in weird contexts and wrong. I have a really hard time reading that stuff. So for me in Bardic, having more structure is very helpful, like knowing if I want to share something, how do I signal that? And what are the parameters specifically? That's comforting. But also, as Hilla was pointing out, being willing, if you're leading something, if you're leading a Bardic circle or a class or whatever, be willing to give gentle, direct feedback in that moment, privately if it's possible. But, asking people, hey, could you please not interrupt? Hey, could you talk? Hey, you're getting off topic, in the moment helps, I think, immensely. I know I feel a lot more comfortable with people that I know will tell me if I'm running off in some inappropriate direction, or if time's up, or I'm oversharing, or whatever. It engenders trust. And in general, I think I have very low trust for most people, so it's huge. Yeah.
Okay, so neurotypical, conditioned not to interrupt people. How do I How do I do that? How do I help do that if I can't interrupt people to tell them to not interrupt people?
You interrupt them. Literally,
and you ask for consent to offer feedback.
Yeah.
Vital.
So
and changes the dynamic of the space. Ariane.
Yeah, that is really hard for me because I have a really hard time interrupting people. I have like terror of it. And so and like popcorn is like a really terrifying. And I was just talking to Darian because I have that from the other side because I ended up going to the other side because I wanted to be a Laurel really badly. And so this whole idea of like telling people stuff, like this criticism, because I mean, I saw somebody like talk about like people criticizing other people's costumes and being a costuming Laurel, and he would punch one of them, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in the worst demographic. I was like terrified. I didn't talk to anybody for like a month. Oh, it's like, I don't know how to give feedback unless, because I'm neurodivergent as well, and I don't pick up this crap. So I just shut up.
So one of the things, and speaking, kind of combining this, Aro, were you speaking as someone who's leading a circle that you're interested in that, or just someone who happens to be there? That's
a good question. I don't typically volunteer to lead circles, okay. But if the person who is leading the circle isn't doing a good job of leading the circle, or if there is no circle leader, if it's just sort of a spontaneous circle and there's no focus, then yeah, it's a good question. If the leader of the circle isn't doing their job.
Hi. So I'm gonna jump in and say, as someone who had to learn how to interrupt properly, because it was something that was like, yelled out of me pretty early. As a female, the first thing, and again, so one of the things that is fairly, okay, as we've said, and there was a reason that we discussed neurodivergence in general, because there are a lot of misconceptions about it. There are even some misconceptions about it in the community of people who don't really connect with the community as a community. And number one, the whole thing about a spectrum. The number two is that, why are we having to define ourselves? We don't really tend to talk about that amongst ourselves necessarily, but it's a useful starting point in how to explain who we are to a neurotypical world that needs those kind of things. But speaking as a female who is conditioned to not interrupt, it's difficult, fairly bog standard across the line of neurodivergent people. It's often, for most of us, and this is a fairly, like, if there's something that is true about most of us, picking up social cues is really hard. So you're going to combine that with interrupting. So I found this. The first of all is doing this. This is fairly universal, at least in Western Europe. There might be different, like this. There are different things. But use your socially acceptable gesture of getting attention in whatever part of the world that you're in. Time out. Don't throw things at someone unless it's like, if you've got a marshmallow catapult, maybe, but don't throw things, but just get their attention. Get their attention in as polite a way as you can. Okay. Waving doesn't work. And then just say, may I interrupt? If it's something where if there's something where they've interrupted you, say, could you please stop interrupting me? If it's something where you're noticing it, be a little bit more discreet. Be like, nudge, or hey. In fact, nudge is kind of I say nudge as a gesture sort of thing. A lot of neurodivergent neurodivergent people don't like to be touched. So don't necessarily just don't grab them, don't nudge them unless you know better. But that said, is that get their attention as nicely as possible and say, hey, do you mind if I mention something? Yeah, we're just really talking over so-and-so. You might want to not do that. Say it, especially if you're a woman, say it in that way. If they're being really rude, go, dude. Sorry. It's just Midwest, dude is used for all sexes. Dude, shut up. Dude, you keep interrupting. Could you please knock it off? Get kind of gradually, be like an alarm clock. Get gradually louder if you have to.
And of course, there are various ways to cloak that in SCA quasi-period appropriate.
Sure. So let me ask.
Could get the message across and won't always. Go ahead.
So let me ask this. In general, does a neurodivergent person respond differently to being interrupted than a neurotypical person?
Yes.
Is it a more positive experience or a more negative?
It's going to vary heavily.
What was that?
It's good. It will vary wildly,
depending
on what their neurodivergence is in their own experience. I hate getting interrupted for some of the same reasons I interrupt other people so readily, which is my short-term memory is for crap. And so it's very, very easy to forget what I was about to say, which is one of the reasons it's very hard for me to hold it in. And I'm working hard here. And in other spaces, one of the reasons that I like stepping up to moderate online conversations, for example, is that it's a space that lets me continue to practice the muscles of reading a room and watching to see if everyone's getting heard and if everyone is melding well. And I kind of hope it will build up, to be really, really honest, I've always done that with a mind toward building up a well of goodwill that I hoped would get me through the moments when I act more typically myself in ways that other people don't enjoy.
I know from my experience, when I call to the carpet for doing something that I didn't realize I've done, because I joke about being a bitch. I tend not to actually be one. I have this really tough exterior, etc. But one of the things that I'm going to put this in here really quick. Aphasia. Aphasia is when we lose our English. When we lose our language. My native language is English. And I'm going to say that this is very Bardic-y too. Another thing that is something that happens with many people across the neurodivergent community is during certain situations we can get aphasic, which basically means that you can't talk. So it's rather like if you forget a word, if you're neurotypical and you forget a word and you're like going, as I've put it, I forgot how to English. I can sit there and there are people who know me and they know when I'm aphasic-ish. There are degrees of aphasia. There's just when I'm like, blah, 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 blah. And then there are other times when it's like, the words are weird and bad. So that's just because I suddenly got aphasic and that. Some people have been taught shame, to feel shame for doing things that are neurodivergent, like not reading the social cues, and so interrupting because you don't know that it's not your time to talk, or this just regular conversation. It's like going, holy crap, wait, I have how many rules to follow? This is another thing. And it's kind of woven in there. It's not that neurodivergence neurodivergent people can't do the same things, or many of the same things a neurotypical person can. It's just that we actually have to think about it.
Right. Yeah. But my concern is I don't want to make anybody feel worse.
Right. So basically what it is that's why I say be gentle.
Yeah.
Because there are those of us who are like, oh, thank you so much for letting me know. And many of us who will be like, in retrospect, further down the ride. But it also may something where we're really glad to have that feedback, but we also may cry about it because we feel so bad. And I see Rukaya has her finger up, and thankfully it's not.
I'm just watching the questions in the chat. So there's some questions going on, just to say this out loud because some people will only get the recording. Wanting to find out basically what makes a good or comfortable venue for performing that's inclusive to neurodivergent performance, and how do we provide the most supportive environment. And here, there's an idea that comes to my mind that I haven't really seen it before, but in the thread of how we, and I notice as I say this, that I forgot to put my pronouns on my name, but how a lot of us have started, even if we're cisgendered or go by our presenting pronouns, to still introduce ourselves with, hi, my name is Rukaya. I go, my pronouns are she, her, sir, or, whatever, makes it more inclusive for people who might be trans, might be gender fluid, might not match their presenting gender, for whatever reason. So I'm wondering if there might be some way of introduction into these circles as a neurotypical, where not that it's necessarily normal for neurodivergent people to come right out and say, hi, I'm neurodivergent, but I've been seeing that a little bit more and more. It may be helpful as a host to say, hi, I'm, these are my pronouns, I'm neurotypical, this is an open and welcoming space. Please let me know if there's any way that I can help you perform in this space, or if you need feedback. Just a thought.
I really like that. That is really brilliant. I mean, admittedly, now not everyone is comfortable with that. Because part of it is so new, so we can be the pioneers of doing that. That'll be good. And I will get to you in a second, Drake.
I'm just keeping the finger up so I don't forget.
Yes. To also answer the what makes a good or comfortable venue for performing. Okay. So again, this is going to be in general, because again, we're going to go always with the caveat of one size does not fit all. One of the things is that you're going to want to choose a space that does not have excessive stimulation outside of the circle. So in other words, for example, a fire is nice, okay? But make sure that the fire is not burning particularly toxic wood, okay? Making sure that you have, that necessarily have it in if it's an indoor Bardic, have it in a special room if you can get that. Or just basically tell people, this is Bardic here, please stop interrupting. That's the biggest thing, is not having random people just wandering through. Setting clear expectations beforehand. I've started taking to...
And during,
yes. I've started taking to giving an introduction, explaining how the circle is going to work, and then making sure that it is explained during the middle of it. The other thing is kind of goes in, it's going to sound a little bit weird, but I'm going to say this because it's used in the Bardic community, is make it a Bardic safe space. What that means is that, for example, tonight we are going to have a journeyman's concert. I have certain expectations of that journeyman's concert. It is not what I would call a Bardic safe space, in that there is a certain level of bard that I have expected for this concert, and I am expecting every bard to be at their top performance if they can manage it, because this is a showcase showcasing how awesome they are. On the other hand, most of my bardic circles, I want it to be, we're sitting around the circle and we want to be able to do this. So the person that this is their first damn event and they've never sung before, and you know what, they only know the water is wide and it's off key and everything like that. That's fine. That's fine. I want them to know that they can come and that they can share, because this is a bardic community, and that I want them to feel that they're part of that community. So it's the same thing of you know, with the neurodivergent population, is just be like, okay, you are welcome here. You know, if you are like having to get up, if you're doing this, if you're flapping, if you're, you know, as long as you are not excessively interrupting other performers, and even if you are, if we can, you know, discuss it in a constructive way, you are welcome here. You know, and so that is, you know, really how you're going to, you know, make that welcoming to a neurodivergent population, is letting them know that they're welcome and that they don't have to be, that they don't have to mask who they are, that they can just be them and don't have to be normal.
Can we take a moment, if I want to jump off what you just said, Hilla, because I know I threw the word out earlier, and it's probably helpful. Let's briefly talk about masking. But it's a term that's actually relatively recent for me. I find it helpful, and I'd love to take no more than 3 to 5 minutes to talk about what it is, to talk about what it isn't, because I know that there's been some contentious conversations in the neurodiversity group about, for example, social skills training, where it is sometimes treated as an insistence on learning how to mask, which it can be. And that isn't all that it is, in my experience. Annalita.
So I'm going to address it simply because during my diagnosis process, which has been quite recent, one of the things that was said to me was, wow, because I did a barrage of tests and the whole shebang. Like that's been my experience. You have probably been masking really hard for a long time, was the statement given to me by my professionals. And so essentially that is, for me, looking outward, is the extra work that it takes in order to process and understand and fit within a construct that seems to be pretty simple for everyone. When you're walking through molasses, it's figuring out how to look like you're walking through water. and some of it's unconscious and some of it is hard work. I think a lot of it's more hard work than many folks see or admit or can acknowledge potentially for themselves too. So I'm throwing that out as a person who's lived this experience and hasn't really had words for it for a long time too. And as somebody who, as Drake sort of just mentioned in the comment, might surprise people to know that this is also part of my lived experience as a woman with ADHD as well. But everyone is different, and so the places where my challenges are different. So, but the masking is, I think, the brutalest way is to say how easily you appear to walk the world as a neurotypical person.
Right. And masking also covers, if I may, the ways in which your choice to do that is invisible to people around you. Therefore, they are, if you're doing it well, completely unaware of the amount of energy and constant conscious effort that it costs you.
I'm going to also jump on that too. And this is, I will preface this because I am, probably because I'm a woman. I'm going to preface this with saying that this is not to cut down the male population here. It is far more likely in the neurodivergent community that a woman is going to be masking than a male is. Socially, we are expected to do this far more than a dude is. Dude on this case is look, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Chicago, so you're just gonna have to know. You're gonna have to figure out when I mean dude as dudes and dude as like, you know, male. Because I'm not gonna tell you. I'm just that way.
You're among bards, and let's go.
I'm among bards, but so we're expected as a female. We are expected just as our default to mask and that and you know, it was very it was actually very liberating when I realized what that you know, autism wasn't just the classical, because again, I'm 52. There was, when I was growing up, there was a specific expectation for what it was, which is one of the reasons I, you know, didn't get, I mean, there are signs that it was like going duh. And it was very liberating just to know that I wasn't just, you know, flu crazy. Not meaning that against anyone with mental health issues really, but you know, that kind of like I say that as this is how you look at it, you know, how you're viewed from a neurotypical thing, is how she's kind of out there, and I'm like, no, I'm this way for a reason. One thing I'd like to bring up though also about Bardic, and this is just an experience that is especially online and everything, but so I know that we have some neurotypical people here, and I know that one of the things that has been said about online Bardic is it's difficult because you don't have as much way to read the audience. Hi, welcome to the neurodivergent world. One of the things, again, because a huge number, not everyone, but a huge number of neurodivergent people have difficulty picking up on social cues. Again, not everyone, but many, a majority of us have difficulty picking up those social cues. And it is a skill that we have to develop as bards to read an audience. Because if you do not learn to read an audience as a bard, you have a long way on your journey to become a bard, because part of being a bard is actually reading your audience. And so I was actually, in some way, I realized about 2 months into the whole online process is, oh, you're in my territory now. I can help you guys learn how to function in a world where you cannot read the social cues as much because they're not really there. I can help you learn how to perform better even though you're not getting that audience feedback. So it was kind of a oh my goodness, we're it felt like, oh my god, we're all on even footing now. It's so cool. So I was kind of ashamed with myself for the giggle, but I giggled because I said, yay. We're on equal terms. Drake, yes.
Well, Kaya's actually waited longer than me.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see her finger.
No, it's okay. She put it down.
That's okay.
But my short-term
I got tired. And I wasn't sure it was, I had one thought with regards to the whole masking conversation, just to jump back a brief. That one of the things I've noticed for myself and for a few other people that I know with masking, where it actually has physiological consequences. Muscle tension, pain, illness, stomach ache, chronic illness, fatigue, all of those things. So, you know, when we're talking about masking, we're not just talking about acting or, you know, a superficial thing. It's something that as neurodivergent people, we internalize our masking. Sometimes, I mean, I thought that I was bipolar for a long time. Now I think maybe I'm actually just autistic and ADHD and have been, you know, struggling to deal with all that. And then to come into the present conversation with regards to performance and, sorry, I'm trying to pick up, you know, the short-term memory threads.
I'm trying to take.
I'll let Drake go while I recover the train of thought.
Was that okay? Thank you. So what I do want to speak to is something my wife said to me very early on. We're married 18 and a half years now. And she observed something that obviously, like everything else, as a generalization is suspect, but it's held true for a lot of people we've known, that there are a lot of people that we've known who turn out to have ADHD, if nothing else. And the observation my wife has made is that one trait that most of them, maybe 80 to 90%, certainly not all, seem to have in common was a far above average comfort in public speaking. A greatly reduced tendency towards stage fright, which it has occurred to me as I've thought about it, that I believe to be one of the weird little upsides of the difficulty that I have sensorily processing what's going on in a room. Performing simplifies a room for me. It makes it about me putting out what's in my mind, what I've prepared. And all I really have to do in that moment is see overall whether it's going over. What I don't necessarily have the energy or the focus for is nuances of little things I might be getting wrong, or whether I've been putting a foot wrong socially. And as a result, I have less anxiety most of the time when I'm performing. And thus, I suspect there's a feedback loop that somebody with better filters than I has, which inhibits them, that doesn't inhibit me. The big exception of that was once I took up an instrument, something that I knew going in, I was taking up years later than most people that I was watching perform. And I picked a really difficult instrument. And for the first time, I found out what it was like to choke in front of a big audience, because no matter how much I'd practiced, if I hadn't practiced in front of a live audience and gotten comfortable with being observed while I tried to sing and play lute at the same time, I froze. And it was my fingers almost literally turned to lead. And I did that at the first round of a Royal Bardic competition. And it blows my mind to this day that I managed to make it to the finals that year. Hilla.
Rukaya, first of all, do you have your thing that you're going to thing? Okay.
John, if you want to.
I'm going to just kind of add to that and build on that then. I've never had, okay, so it's kind of funny because I've never had an issue with speaking publicly. It's more of, hey, can we actually get Hilla to shut up? No, not really. But the other thing is that although I have had a stage fright to a certain degree, not usually like terror, but a certain amount of stage fright. Here's the thing, though, that I'm going to say about stage fright is there is this fine line between what we're going to talk about, the actual adrenaline of performance. There is a certain energy to performance. Now, because the body is the body, and what I'm saying with the body being the body is humans are just like, we're built stupid in a way, you know. So there is a very fine line between terror and excitement. An extremely, extremely fine line. So sometimes what your body is interpreting and even your mind is interpreting as stage fright is a certain amount of just, yes, why are we made of meat? A certain amount of it is actually just the adrenaline of performance. The excitement of performance has actually gotten so intense that it turns to terror. There is a wonderful woman, Lucia Elena Braganza, who teaches a class on how to get over stage fright. just do whatever you do to let off steam. It's actually going to help you. You don't, if you have a certain amount of adrenaline, it's great, and that adrenaline is going to help you. I found that out just as a lifelong performer, is that the time that you're going to feel like the most comfortable, if you're really comfortable, really comfortable, if you're really comfortable, you are too comfortable and you need to do something to get your energy up to perform. I've also, though, found is that part of when we created this class, there was talking about seeing the world differently. The spectrum, neurodivergence is a processing situation here. We process the world in a different way than someone who is neurotypical. We may have things that are very much commonalities, but we still process the world differently. Now, the downside of that is it makes it very difficult in many ways to cope in a neurotypical world. The upside is of it that it makes a lot of us, I'm not going to say everyone, because again, I think the caveat's already there. There is no one size fits all. Is that I've found that there are a ton of neurodivergent bards. And the reason for that is that those same things that make it so incredibly difficult to cope in a neurotypical world is it also makes us look at that world in a way that can be expressed extremely creatively and extremely differently in ways that are going to catch an audience. So it's one of the things I want to tell anyone who is neurodivergent is, do you have this way of like, you have things that, well, you say that really weird. Write it down, make a song out of it. Write down, make a poem of it. Because looking at that world differently is what fuels so many of us to actually create what we're doing to perform for the neurotypical folk. Drake.
Thank you. Speaking briefly to that before I get to the point I wanted to make, I'll mention that I'm actually going to tonight perform 2 pieces, one of which is a lute piece where we'll get to find out whether I freeze up or not. And the other of which is a piece that actually is probably the most personal piece I've written, which really is about my experience of having to learn how to mask and having to learn how to follow the rules that SCA culture requires of me or expects of me, which is why the title of the piece is I Must Be Silent. But the point I was thinking back to the point Arwa made about feedback and how to be supportive, and something just came to me during this conversation, which is, I think many people, I want to say we all, but many people, all of us to some degree or other, I think when we see other people struggling or stumbling, most everybody really has compassion and wants to help. And what I think holds many people back is, of course, the risk of hurting someone's feelings. Giving direct feedback can really hurt. Let me say that I get that the current feedback model of channeling one's feedback through a trusted friend, essentially a trusted advisor who presumably has more experience, it is not the worst way in the world to do this as a concept. If you find the right person who can get that balance. At the moment between Toki and Peregrine, because I'm a lot, and in the end I was blessed when I made my transition about almost 2 years ago to find 2 Laurels who are close enough to home and who, when I dropped the hint loudly enough, talked to each other, they were friends, and realized that each of them had something to offer me and that they were very complementary, and that us working as a team might really be good for me, and it's been phenomenal. That said, A world I'd love to see, a place I'd like to see individuals and our society's culture move, is a world in which when I feel, or when you feel, the impulse to offer correction, to offer assistance and support, to help someone who you judge is making mistakes that are going to hurt them and you don't want to see them hurt, you recognize that no matter how you slice it, no matter how kindly, no matter how far back you choose to be when you wish to offer this feedback, I invite you to recognize the difference between protecting the emotional safety of the recipient and protecting your own. I have a story that I tell myself that at the moment, this setup protects the emotional safety of the peers in ways that it does not protect mine. To offer someone help is a risk. It carries a burden. And my invitation to you is to consider, when you wish to offer someone genuine help, to think about how deeply you want to are willing to invest, how much emotional risk you're willing to take, how much responsibility for the impact of your words you're willing to be. And that is not my way of saying don't do it. That is my way of saying, if you're going to tell someone that they are ruffling other people's feathers at this event because you know that will be beneficial to them, I ask that you consider that you're responsible and that you should think about, what does the aftercare of making that choice and offering that support look like? In my experience, most neurodivergent people that I know are very, very forgiving of sincere, heartfelt apologies, even for things that were necessary, that were judged to be appropriate and necessary at the time. If someone gives me a piece of feedback that stings like alcohol at the moment, and then reaches out to me the next day or a few days later or a week later and says, listen, I want to check in on how you're doing because I get that I might have really hurt your feelings doing that. And I want you to know I take responsibility for that. And if you'd rather not get feedback from me, tell me. And more importantly, I think, I really want you to understand how much I care about you. I want to take a moment to show you the things I see in you that I really love, that drove me to want to invest myself in you this way. You're amazing. You matter to me. And that's why, as a friend, I took that risk and I realized maybe it wasn't mine to take for you. So you tell me and I'll be guided going forward by what you want. But taking that follow-up would make a tremendous difference, certainly to me. And it's a big burden to ask. And for those of you who enjoy neurotypical privilege, I invite you to consider that that is one way to use that privilege that can be a real benefit and can make a tremendous, meaningful difference in the life and path of a neurodivergent person who you meet and get to know. I'm complete on that. Go ahead, Helen. Thank you, Annalita. Aftercare just came to my mind. I was like, if you frame it that way, that's really helpful. And I never thought of it before. So I'm glad I threw it in there. Go ahead.
The one thing that I'd like to say also is that speaking, as a peer, and I'm looking confidentiality and all that. Right now, the system that we have is exceedingly ableist. And I'm not just talking about being ableist to people who have physical difficulties getting to events and that, but it's very ableist in the fact that it's an extremely difficult situation for people who have mental health issues also, but neurodivergent people have, because it is very labyrinthine. It is very archaic and it is very opaque. And that makes it difficult to understand. And so honestly, getting rid of most of the secrecy would be a good thing. We don't have to specifically know what peer said what about us. Okay? Like, here's the thing. we talked earlier about advancement and being bards, and that is okay. Most of us we ain't dumb. Most of us who are at a certain level know that we're being looked at, whether or not we're going to be peers. Some of us may have been fed, a note, hey, the peers are watching you. Okay. But again, a lot of us, we're already masking. We're already in a situation where we are not necessarily always ourselves, because we are trying very hard to work in a society that's, and as I'm not meaning the SCA society, I'm talking about the general society. It's not designed for us. The SCA is a little bit more forgiving of neurotypical of neurodivergence than main society as a whole, but it is still exceedingly opaque in many places and exceedingly ableist that way. We're masking, and so we're not always ourselves. That doesn't mean that, you're looking at an imposter. It just means that, we are keeping up certain levels of coping skills to work with, those who are neurotypical. But the problem is that things like the secrecy, the lack of clarity, the I got a secret, so somebody said something about you. There's something very grade school about it. And yeah, it may be cool because you can talk about us all you want and we can't know about it. But the thing is that it makes it very hard, especially if there are those of us who are knowing that we're being looked at by peers. I'll tell you, the last couple years, I've known that I've been looked at by peers. And hey, if you're a peer watching this, so sorry I'm talking about you, but it is what it is. And if you're mad at me for that, you can contact me. Talking to the camera there, breaking the fourth wall. It's difficult because it's so opaque, and I'm like, for me, I have a physiological need to know. I grew up with people talking about me behind my back, and so it's a certain like, oh crap, there are people talking about me behind my back, and that is something that neurodivergent people, we know that people talk about us all the time behind our back because it's just, so it's an added stress. The second the second point is, so getting rid of that, that secrecy is definitely, a thing, and saying, hey, and yes, I will. But the other thing is, I'll get right back right to you. The second thing is, if you need to talk to somebody's peer, no. Talk to somebody's peer and somebody, because it's very difficult to be approached by your peer and saying, well, so-and-so said something about you, they have a problem. The last thing on that before I get to you, Ariane, and this is the society as a whole. People make mistakes. Okay, and I'm speaking now directly to not just you all, but people watching this afterwards. People make mistakes. People do things. There are people who are denied advancement, who are denied awards that they really deserve, who are denied recognition because they pissed off the wrong person 20 years ago. Because they did something that somebody misinterpreted, but that somebody that misinterpreted is in a position of power and is using it against them, and it is society-wide, and it's not just neurodivergence, and it needs to effing stop now. People are people. If someone did something 4, 3, 2, even 5 years ago, that's one thing. If someone did something 20 years ago, that's something else entirely. Just drop it off the radar. I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. And for God's sakes, if you have problems with how somebody does X, before you decide to block them out, talk to them and find out what the heck is going on. Ariane.
Hey, all right. First of all, because this gets real close to home on both sides. 1, I'm not mad. 2, I went through it, and one of my problems, because I did go through all of it, was that, well, one, it was really bad, and I knew about it because everybody told me. But two, I get pretty paranoid about the whole thing. So I get very imaginative and very scared, and it makes it very hard for me to be comfortable or do anything at all. It's just terrifying. And so I don't like the secrecy because it does make it, because I don't know what it is, and I will get paranoid and I will imagine, and literally the only reason I actually made it in the SCA, this is personal, hi, everybody's being recorded or watching this. The only reason I stayed in the SCA really is because there were a bunch of laurels that were basically sort of combination, either amateur therapists or people that literally like made me stay. I was literally in a tent in Penzing, and one of these things was going on, and I was literally about to run out, not screaming, quietly, and leave the SCA forever. And the dude blocked me, and he was huge. He's like 500 pounds, and he said, "You can't leave. If you leave, there'll be a hole in the SCA." And I literally had to have like a bunch of laurels hold my hand through it because I am autistic and I've been through a lot, and it's terrifying. So I agree with you on the secrecy. So anybody that's listening to this later, I went through it, and I have the same perspective. And as far as people making mistakes, I will say this, for the most part, being on the other side of it now, because I get to read the candidate comments because I am a Laurel now, is that it isn't as bad as you think most of the time. There's a lot of laurels, and there's an understanding, and it is stated explicitly if things are brought up. There's like a 2-year rule. If it happened more than 2 years ago, don't bring it up. The person has probably changed. On the other hand, if somebody really is mad because we're not, not all of us are incredibly emotionally mature, and you can't tell, there's not a test for that for peerage. They can like be more subtle about your work and stuff, but generally people do try very hard in the circles, in the peerage circles, not to do that and to understand that people make mistakes. And I will say one more thing. One thing that helped me with some of this is to find a couple of peers that were very, very honest. That's one of the reasons I chose Isabel for my Laurel, is because I knew she would tell me crap I did not want to hear. She would, no matter how upset I was going to be, she would tell me. And so I would be told pretty quickly if I needed to do something or if I needed to change my behavior or whatever. And I was willing to learn from it, and I was willing to take the advice. And that helped a lot. And I will say, probably a lot. I'm still socially awkward and probably do a lot of crap that bothers people. But they did give me a sapphire, so apparently I did something well at one point. That's it. Thank you. Hopefully it helped.
It's because when they give you the sapphire because you swear far less than I do at events.
Maybe so.
No, you are freaking awesome, girl. And Annalena had also raised her hand, I believed.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I love these little icons when I remember to use them. There's so there is, I'm going to put in just a little side note. So one, I absolutely agree. I think there's a certain if you are a relatively normal person in your general behaviors in the world, I would say that you can rest assured that most peers in polling orders are not being like enormous jerks and are not disparaging you and saying terrible things about anyone, right? Like there is a certain general professional courtesy overall. In certain kingdoms, the royalty even really specifies, like, if it is an old issue, I don't want to hear about it. Like, y'all figure it out. Like, this isn't, we're dealing with people who grow and change. So I think that, so like for me, I think people who are looking at patterns and even those are generally very politely stated, and they're critically thought. They're not capricious. So I do want to kind of give a little bit of like the sort of peerage piece. I also want to say, related to Bardic arts in particular, Bardic Bardic arts is a hellish thing to try to get a peerage in the first damn place, right? So let's talk about that for just a moment. That it is, so it is my art, but I am not recognized for the things that I am known for. I am not recognized for the songs that people sing that I wrote, or the stuff that gets sung at Nightings, or the things that are sung at the Green Dragon when I'm not there. Like, this is not why I have my laurel. My laurel is about a whole, like, diverse arts of noise and words. That is my laurel. But it is not really about the stuff that makes me feel like me, or the stuff that makes me known.
Yeah.
So that's a big challenge outside of the neurodivergence that we share. Like, the art form that we are in the middle of is a harder, weirder path to try to get to a peerage. So I'm trying to, like, set the expectations of both things.
We are a tough fit for an artifact-based model.
Yes. Yeah, it's a really challenging model, and very, very rarely are people recognized for this specific thing. It's always a bunch of stuff surrounding it. So those are my sort of two pieces on that.
If I may.
Mm-hmm.
I want to offer a variation on something I probably spoke to earlier, but around the feedback piece, a way that I would invite people to think about having the conversation if you wish to offer feedback to someone. This is what I would love to have, and I will let each of you tell me whether I'm only speaking for me or whether this would be something that would be wonderful for you as well. I would love to know if somebody had enough feedback that they were really concerned about, that they want to go to my peer or my peers and offer something. I would love for them to do this, which is Peregrine, hypothetically. I like Drake, and here's something that I've observed about him that I think is probably getting in his way. I want to share it with you, and I'd like you to tell me, does it make sense? Would you perhaps reach out to Drake and ask him if he is open to having a conversation with me so that I can stand behind my observation and I can share it more fully with him and hear from him so that I can modulate my feedback and perhaps, tweak it in real time based on how it's landing. If he's open to that, let me know. And he and I can find some time on the phone or on a video call. If that's something that you think would benefit him. And if not, that's fine. That way, that puts me as the one giving the feedback, and it's me taking responsibility, and gives that person an opportunity to be heard and seen. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to just throw this in here right now. We have 5 minutes left. Well, we have less than 5 minutes left, but we have 5-ish minutes left. Now, this room is not going to close, so if anyone wants to discuss, but I know that there's other classes going on. I can't remember what's going on next, but Ruqayyah, do you have any final words that you would like to give before we zip out?
I think we've touched on, a lot of it. Obviously, this conversation can go on even further. And, maybe, it's nice to know that there are people concerned about making a more welcoming space. Certainly, if that's something that interests folks, we have the groups on Facebook and all that are, and also the diversity, equity, inclusion, all of that groups are good things to be involved in, to continue to learn more and to stay connected. I know just having the community of neurodivergent people, of LGBTQ people, all the various Venn diagrams that I'm part of, really helps me as a person not get scared off from dealing with this weird social amoeba with bizarre and opaque rules that is the SCA. And fortunately, I am also coming into it with a very casual, I'm not really intending to go for awards and things, but that's partly just a protective measure of, I don't want to deal with all this bullshit. So that continue to have the conversations, continue to learn, continue to welcome people as best as you're able. Thanks for coming. That's my final thought.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say that I've really appreciated the Bardic community, because even while the SCA as a whole is fairly ableist, um, it's getting better. And I'm so immensely glad that y'all came to this, to this conversation here. It's felt more like a conversation than just a panel. I am so glad that you've come to this, because it is something that really needs to be an ongoing conversation. In fact, I'm not going to name names or anything, just because there are some people who said, why do you want to have this round table? I don't understand the need for this round table. And I really passionately had to, fight, and Rukaya helped me passionately fight for this round table, just to say, and Siobhan, we're all proponents of why this needs to be a thing, because we are the Bardic community. The Bardic community is probably one of the most diverse groups in the SCA. I have, seen everybody is welcomed into the Bardic community. Hey, chicken, you have made me very, very proud to be a bard, because you have really all, as a community, become a community and banded together. Even when I see other subgroups, sniping from within and everything, I don't generally see that. So if there are some of you all in the Bardic community who are sniping and everything, number one, stop it. Number two, y'all are really good at hiding yourself, but 99% of the Bardic community is very welcoming. I actually have seen that there are also recently people who are doing signing for Bardic. And so I just also want to say out there, I'm sorry that I haven't done closed captioning on this. Maybe someone will do a transcript of this, for anyone who is hard of hearing.
Meets is great for that, because it does real-time auto, and
Good.
transcribing is better than most.
Good, because really, one of the things that I'd like is really people who have other who have other difficulties, who have other disabilities, and that notice I did not talk about neurodiversity as a disability. Neurodivergence is not what it can become a disability when it makes it difficult. When it's a disability, disability means a lack of ability to participate in the normal world. So it can become a disability. It is not in and of itself a disability, but the Bardic community has really, really welcomed so many people, and I think that this talk needs to continue to be heard and not pushed, but it needs to be brought to the fore, so that we can be more welcoming to everybody, which is why we're doing this, which is why we're doing Barding Beyond Europe, so that we can be more inclusive, which is why we're doing things with women, which is why we want to, next time I'm running this, we're also going to be doing an LGBTQ concert. So just, I want to make sure that these diverse groups have been underserved so much for so long are not underserved, and I really want to thank the Bardic community as a whole, including all of you who have come to this. I love you, for being so open and for really paving the way for a better Bardic community.
Thank you, Hilla, for putting this together, for investing that passion and fighting for it. I'm not that surprised. I think I was more surprised to hear this was going to happen in the Bardic, in as part of the Bardic Symposium than anything else. And if I may just offer one personal piece about the Bardic community, writing is one of my great passions, and it's always suffered because as an ADDer, I find it so infuriatingly difficult to revisit words after I've put them down and then try to rework them and revise them and edit them and recraft them. This is the first space that I have ever really felt was worth doing that. The Bardic community and the SCA audience is so rewarding. The ability to be seen and heard, to be able to transmute the pain of my experience, most of which for me comes from this that we're talking about right now, and turn that into something that is more universal. Turn those emotions into things that allow me to demonstrate an ability to observe compassion for people who aren't me and don't always look like me, or aren't my gender, my race, my situation. The response that I get, the ability to be seen and heard that way, and to have stories out there that make a difference, has made it worth it for me to learn how to craft things, to revise them, to polish them, to the point that for the first time in my life, I've discovered that editing and polishing are my favorite part of the process, which still blows my mind. Because once I have the basics down, I know what I want for this community, which is something that as I like to put, shines in the sunlight. And when I'm getting closer to it, I've learned to trust that that process will pay off because of all of you, because you have embraced me and you have held me, and none of the nicks and wounds have prevented me from getting up again, because it's always been worth coming back to. And I love you all, and I'm here for this. Thank you.
Rukaya, did you have anything else you wanted to say? All right, I'm going to say, if we want, the room is going to be open. Okay, I'm going to stop recording now. Just so we can do that. The room is open. Let me stop. Hi, ending recording. Thank you. Boom.